Hello, everybody. Welcome. Oh, I'm so excited. Welcome to the Alden Room. I'm very excited to welcome you to the 18th Alden Scholar Series lecture. And my name is Heather Stalter. I'm head of the University Archives and Special Collections here in the library. And it is my pleasure to welcome our presenters today. But first, I just want to tell you a little bit. The Alden Scholar Series began over 12 years ago as a joint collaboration between the members of the library and the Department of History, and it has expanded ever since. The goal of the series is to celebrate faculty scholarship. Lectures are held here in the Alden Room, where historic treasures and primary source documents are housed and made available for research and browsing. Lots of treasures here, so it's a good place to be. The room is fittingly named in honor of the very first librarian of Oneonta Normal School, which eventually became SUNY Oneonta, Jessica Alden. So many people made today's special event possible. And first, I would like to thank the other members of the Alden Scholar Series Committee. From the History Department, Drs. Matthew Henley, our chair, Nicole De Silva, Meta Harder, and Danny Norlander. And from the library, Dr. Mary Lynn Benson, Sophia Dunn, and Megan Palmer. Special thanks also to Darren Chase, Library Dean, for funding the refreshments, which will be available after the event. Darren Lyons in OAS for making the book available for pre-order. Sarah Simpson, Art Gallery Director, for printing the photos of the display. Matt LaPalooza and the custodial staff for getting this room in such beautiful shape. And finally, Mark Farrell in IT for recording this event and making the online magic possible. Okay, almost done. 3 quick reminders. In order to keep the materials in this room safe and available and in good shape for future generations, we do ask that everybody leave food and drink outside the room. So that was 1. 2, please just remember to turn off your cell phone ringers. And 3, in case of an emergency, please note that the main doors, if you need to exit the building, you just go out the main doors and down the stairs to the left to the first floor. If you leave this way, you would go down the hall to the left and then out the stairs to the right and down to the basement level. Hopefully there won't be an emergency, but just in case. And finally, lead credit will be offered at the end of the event, and I'll tell you a little bit more after the event. So after the presentation, there will be time for Q&A, and I will return to share a few more reminders before we break for refreshments in 318. And now I'd like to introduce my colleague, Michelle Henley, Head of Collection Development, Resource Management, and Sharing, as she'll introduce our speakers.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the latest Alden Scholar Series. Today's event is about history, but not from the distant past. Instead, it is about a major historical event everyone in this audience experienced, the worldwide COVID pandemic. This evening's event will feature a presentation by Ann Trader from the Department of History, Matthew Henley, Department of History, Ed Beck, Faculty Center, and Darren Chase of Milne Library about the recently published book, Chronicling a Crisis, SUNY Oneonta's Pandemic Diaries, published by SUNY Press. Chronicling a Crisis is a powerful primary source collection compiled during the peak of the COVID pandemic between spring 2020 and spring 2021. It began as a blog project entitled The Semester of Living Dangerously and evolved into the book you will hear about today, with additional chapters giving historical context, thematic analysis, and reflections on the technology and challenges of the project. With over 200 blog entries from SUNY Oneonta students, faculty, and staff, including diary reflections, poems, pictures, and thought pieces, this volume lays bare the grief, frustration, fear, resilience, and upheavals of this tumultuous period. Each co-editor and co-author played a key role. Ann Trader was the originator and inspiration behind the project, which began with her class as a written diary. Matthew Henley was chair of the history department during the COVID crisis and helped grow the project into one for all history students. Discussions between Matthew and Anne soon grew to include Darren Chase and Ed Beck, who helped the project very rapidly become an active blog open for contributions from all faculty, staff, and students at SUNY Oneonta. Ed began discussions with SUNY Press, who showed immense interest in the project, and the entire editorial team worked hard to transfer the raw blogs into the book they will talk about today. Sit back and enjoy.
Here's the yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Michelle, as always, and good evening, everybody. I'm sure we all have memories of the lockdown time, the good, the bad, and the incredibly tedious. But our story tonight starts way before that, and I'm sure it will come as no surprise to you that as a historian, I'm going to take you back to the not so distant past. In the summer of the early summer of 2014, I found myself in the Copenhagen, Denmark airport with really cranky travel companions. And we had just endured an all-night flight to Europe, and we were now facing a layover of 7 hours. I decided to ditch my companions and hit the airport bookstore. And in case you're wondering why I wanted a book to read, let us recall this was a time of no Wi-Fi, free or otherwise, in airports, and I didn't have a cell phone anyway, so it kind of made it pointless. I got to the bookstore and I located the English language section. I was in Denmark after all, and I found a book called Our Longest Days, A People's History of the Second World War. It was a selection of wartime diary entries taken from the archives of mass observation, a project founded in the UK in 1937, and you'll hear more about that a little bit later. I'd heard of mass observation before, but I'd never worked with it or read any of its material. The book, though, seemed to hit all the right marks that day. It was historical. It was a selection of diary entries for the tired brain, and it was reasonably priced at 129 kroner, about 15 bucks to you and me. I returned to my companions. I gave them a stack of English language newspapers to keep them entertained, and I began to read the book. Honestly, more to stay awake than out of any real enthusiasm. I mean, I had 5.5 hours of that layover still ahead of me. I was hoping really just to pass the time. But then I found I couldn't put it down. I could not stop reading. I had it finished by the time the plane landed at our final destination, and I knew I had to expose students to this material. We were studying World War II in my survey course on Western Europe, and I had selected entries from various age groups throughout the war years to give sort of a representative sampling of life on the home front in England. And it was really hard to pick and choose, but the one diarist, I should say, I knew I had to choose was a girl named Muriel Green. Most of my students were 18 or 19 years old, and Muriel herself was the same age when the war broke out and she started her diary. I thought it would be enjoyable for the students to read about someone their own age. Muriel had been working in a village garage, but eventually joined the war effort by becoming a gardener. In her war diary entry, she wrote really candidly about her family, her feelings, her work, her travels. She wrote very sparingly of the war. And for my students, this was the very problem. Isn't this a war diary? Like, where's the war part? We talked about this for a bit, and I said, well, how can we categorize her work? Is it life through a war lens? Is it war through a life lens? And that is when the shouting began. She didn't take anything seriously. She was literally the stupidest person ever. I wanted to shake her and say, what is wrong with you? What? You are totally wrong. She was dealing with the situation. That's my point. She was not dealing with it at all. She was just worried about her food, her makeup, some stupid girls who joined them. She was worried about life and making life more normal. She completely got it. It was an exciting class, to say the least. So now, fast forward, if you will, to spring 2020, the COVID spring. All the college students were sent home, and the faculty are now furiously working to move all their course content online, figure out how to teach the remaining material virtually. I realized at this moment that one of my assignments, a fun map quiz of Europe, was just frankly too low tech to be online. It consisted of a photocopied blank map of Europe with 10 countries randomly selected for identification. How was I going to do that online? Anything that I found was for elementary students and said things like, color France pink. That wasn't going to work for me. So at that moment, two things happened. One of my favorite quotes from Anton Chekhov popped into my head. Any idiot can survive a crisis. It's the day-to-day living that wears you out. True, I thought, but what happens when your daily life is the crisis? Then what? In the next instance, I thought, well, this is tough for me, and I have some experience of online teaching. What in the world must be going through the students' minds? How must they be feeling right now? And this is when I thought of the diary project. Why not create our own version of mass observation? This is a perfect time. Our day-to-day living was certainly a crisis, and this project might help the students manage the crisis, get them to think about what they're experiencing right now, and to allow them to view themselves as part of a larger moment.
So thank you, Anne. So my job here is I wanted to tell you a little more in depth about the history of this organization, UK's mass observation. We were inspired to record some of the more granular parts of the COVID experience at SUNY Oneonta by an earlier effort referred to by Anne from the United Kingdom called mass observation. And mass observation's raison d'etre was to catch the everyday and normal events one encounters when living through a major crisis. The key figures behind the formation of mass observation were three British men from very different disciplines. There was Charles Madge, who was a poet, Tom Harrison was an ornithologist, and Humphrey Jennings was a filmmaker. And their original inspiration for mass observation came not from a crisis caused by disease, but from a crisis caused by a divorce. And that was the major scandal over the abdication crisis of 1936, when this man, King Edward VIII, fell in love with an American woman. And it was bad enough for the British, for their king to fall in love with an American, but this was a twice divorced American, Wallis Simpson. The founding figures of mass observation read a letter published in the British magazine, The New Statesman, in December 1936, and it reflected on the abdication crisis. This unsanctioned romance, considered socially, constitutionally unacceptable with a twice divorced American woman, led to the abdication of the king so that he could marry his true love. And it led to an enormous reaction, even a hysterical reaction by the British public. People throughout Britain were amazed at this love affair, and it led to a national, constitutional, and public crisis. And the letter writer in the New Statesman wanted to know why. Why had the nation suffered what seemed to be a nervous breakdown? The letter writer said, what Britain needs is to create, quote, an anthropology of ourselves to understand Britain's behavior. So with this inspiration in mind, our three founders decided they would create mass observation to study the collective unconscious of the British people. And they decided to do this through a combination of direct observation by participant observers, people who embedded themselves directly in communities and their activities, mostly in Northern England, and written observation by indirect observers who commented on things that they saw in their everyday lives. For our purposes, the most important aspect of mass observation was the diary-based approach by Charles Madge and his London team of indirect observers. There were volunteer correspondents called the National Panel who wrote regularly by hand in journals, and then they mailed them to the mass observation headquarters in London. They were guided by instructions called directives between 1937 and 1945. And these directives would ask the respondents for their opinions on a topic. It could range from trivial everyday activities, what did you eat today, what did you see in a daily walk, to pivotal thoughts on political and international events. In total, almost 1,100 people regularly participated in the national panel, although not all replied to every directive. And it led to a flurry of publications by the mass observation group. Their first publication was called May the 12th, and it recorded all the impressions of a select number of correspondents on the day that George VI was crowned king, the successor to Edward VIII. They also published the famous book, Britain by Mass Observation, which we have in the very nice display created by Meta Carter and Heather, and Nicole is out there. And there were other publications, including first year's work, a first look at the material gathered. One of the more interesting books is called The Pub and the People, which is a study of British drinking habits based on mass observation's work. Now, after the war, mass observation fell into decline, but their papers have remained. And today they're an invaluable resource for historians because of their ability to create and find detail, to reconstruct public opinion and attitudes of the time. The Mass Observation Archive captures small personal details of daily existence by ordinary people in a way that often traditional history writing misses. When you read mass observation, it's an excellent corrective to a traditional focus by historians on famous people, grand events, and historical narratives. And historians have made good use of these archives to create books like Our Longest Days that Anne mentioned, Living Through the Blitz is another study, and numerous others. This archive has now been digitized by Adam Matthews Publishers, but I used them in the 1990s when I was a postdoctoral fellow, and they were at the University of Sussex in England. And when I was using them, I was looking for details of how British women after World War II reacted to post-war austerity. There's lots of comments about housing shortages, food rationing, clothes rationing, and it was fascinating research. These sources are excellent for teaching, research, and general interest. And as soon as Anne mentioned her idea to me about mass observation, I instantly went on board, and the project grew from there. Mass observation covers topics like love lives, food, clothing, pets, hairdos, gas masks, all during a background of crisis, as Britain staggered through the Depression, appeasement with Nazi Germany, and later the Second World War. So at this point, I would like to turn things over to Ed Beck.
Okay. Well, what I hope you get so far is mass observation is different. It's a different way to tell history. It's a different way to tell this story. And part of what we're talking about here is the nature of memory and how your memories are shaped by the years that have passed and the time that has passed between the actual event and what's going on today. And so we're going to invite you to share with a partner, share with someone next to you, what's a memory that you have of the COVID-19 pandemic? Can you get specific? Is there a specific day or a thing that you remember? I'm going to give you a set amount of time. I'm going to give you 2 minutes to turn to a partner and to share one day or one thing that you remember from that COVID-19 pandemic. Go for it. 30 seconds remaining. Ramp it up. I'm going to ask what we came up with. How many people thought of a big event? Often my mind goes to like the day I got my vaccine. That was a big event for me. That was a big day. Snow in 2020. Anybody remember that it snowed on graduation day in 2020? I remember that. A lot of my memories are shaped by the fact that people did write about it in the mass observation diaries, and that reading through those and editing those and re-editing those, I remember. I remember the first time that I went out with a mask. I remember the first time I went out without a mask. Our memories were shaped and changed because we did this. And people wrote about those types of things in our project, and they shared with us, like, we went out for the first time and ate in a restaurant, and that was weird. And I felt weird when the waitress came near us, and it was different. And those things that we recorded, kind of the everyday, this is kind of the point when we talk about mass observation, is those little things that might get lost between those big events. The little things like, how did that first Easter feel? When was the first holiday where we were still weird? It was still small. We were encouraged not to get together with our large extended families, but just to get together with the people that was in our house. Those were the times that we wanted to document, and people sent us those stories and were very candid with us and shared so much of themselves on this public blog. And so that's part of the success of this book, and what we put together was we did capture some of that in ways that I hope are useful for ourselves and in the future for how they tell the story of the pandemic here at SUNY Oneonta. We've gone through the story a little bit from the time of Anne's initial idea, bringing in additional people to the story. We turned it into a blog first. And when we say a blog, we were literally inviting people to broadcast on the internet what they were doing and feeling. And this was part of the Faculty Center's kind of idea and support for the digital humanities on campus. We had recently just gotten a grant to help us give websites away to courses and organizations and personal portfolios, to be able to give away a website and just say, go wild, do what you want to do with it. When we talk about the digital humanities, we're talking about disciplines that usually do their work in different ways, and being digital does change the way we operate. It would have been a very different project if we had gone through with the way it was originally thought of and designed, which was, please turn in your physical handwritten diaries that you have done, and we're going to make it into a special collection in this very room. By going digital from the very beginning, it changed the message. It changed the way we were going to do it. It changed the way people shared. And I'm happy for that. But there were, choices that were made to do that. So, we ended up with a website. And we tried to make it as easy as possible to contribute. We tried to make it as easy as possible. When you clicked on that red button in the top right-hand corner, it automatically created an account for you on the website. It was seamless. It just happened. It was part of some of the work that I did on the back end. And it brought you right to a white page where you could start writing. Or because I modified the way that our system works a little bit, you could upload a photograph or a whole photo essay. Again, because we were doing this digitally, it changed the type of things that people shared. We ended up with much more multimedia than I ever expected. I never in my wildest dreams expected people to create videos and upload them to the blog. We'll show you a little bit of one of those later on. But when we choose to do these things and we choose to go digital, it does change the way we operate and what's going on. I won't bore you too much with what the basic setup was, but we did use a popular website builder called WordPress. It powers like 42% of the internet, and I happen to be on the board of WP Campus, the organization for WordPress in higher ed. It's part of my advocacy to use open source tools in educational purposes like this. And so, yeah, we built this based on WordPress. It was, looking back on it now, it was very early days for us at the Faculty Center of how we use it. We're kind of like doing the next generation of stuff now, but we had modified the theme a little bit. We'd modified the way the system works a little bit just to make sure that everybody could share this type of stuff. But again, what I want you to take away is just the decision to go digital was important for the project and how that eventually happened. Keep going. Okay.
That's your last one.
Yeah, by the numbers, we ended up having 175 faculty, staff, and students participate. We had over 200. We had exactly 258 entries of people who shared. So you can tell that a lot of these were solo entries. People came, contributed once, but we also had people that came back time after time and contributed over and over again. It was up to the individual contributor how they shared things. Some people took diary entries of days and days and days and then put them all into one post. Other people, very short, here's what I was thinking on this day at this moment, and shared that. So we see here over time what people were doing and thinking about and sharing on our blog. And then that blog became the basis as we edited and published this book.
And with that word book, here I am. The Library Dean Darren Chase, thank you. And thanks. I want to just take a moment to share my appreciation and thanks to my co-editors and co-authors and to all of the authors and photographers and contributors to the project. And words like, oh yeah, I'm gonna put it just here. So, from the numbers, we find ourselves among the words, and the great body of words, all of the words. This was mass observation. It involves a lot of words. As you know, the orchard has trees, has apples. Mass observation has individual voices or individual observations become individual reaction. Composition become words. The words remain when the moment is past. And some are socially distanced from other words, spaced apart within long, packed hallways of words, right? And they were in the blog. We took the whole corpus of all of the words of the blog. These observations that have been released into our care. Before we were editors and co-authors, we were the observation caretakers. We were in charge of maintaining the blog and facilitating access to the blog. And once the moment had passed and we were transitioning to creating the book, we took all of the words from every entry And we plugged those into a text analysis toolkit named Voyant Tools. The entire corpus of words was analyzed. Terms, phrases, word frequency, adjacency, average words per sentence. It's a fascinating, powerful tool. I'll be clear and honest, though, for our work, using Voyant Tools was not itself decisive. But it's still really interesting. And what you see here on this slide is a representation of one of the very most basic things that Voyant Tools did that we found very resonant nevertheless. And that if anything could be considered decisive, it's even just understanding from everyone's, entry, from everyone's observation, the most frequently used words. When we look at these words, it's striking. It hits, very metapoetically when I look at this. And I say this, it's through this frequency that we're seeing is struck a kind of pitch, and it becomes the tonal mode of the pandemic diaries. It's characterized by concern and with and observation of time. So we see, here the most frequently used word throughout all of the entries and observations is the word time. April, we see today, we see days, we see week, we see weeks. Time. We're very concerned with time, and we're very concerned with relationships in the entries. Family, people, friends. The spaces and places of belonging. We also see so frequently represented: home, school, work, house, and I'm including online. And let's remember how much time we spent in that place finding our way there and just determining how we belonged in that space. That it was a space we had to inhabit, right? Online. And then pandemic daily life. We see going, and of course the virus itself, COVID, quarantine, and its impacts. So with these, we distilled themes and tensions, and among them, the authors collected observations and reflections on life's journey, life and death, but also what we did versus what we now do, the journey I thought I was taking versus the journey I am now on, with identity, community, health, and freedom, with home, school, work, and online versus in-person, daily activities and difficulties, social distancing and isolation, compassion, stagnation, hope, and despair. So what I'd like to do now is just share from the work. I'm excited to do this. Maybe I'll include even another. They're short, but they're so representative. It really is an honor, actually, to share them. To read them seems fitting and appropriate during our presentation that we hear from some of the authors. So 3 short readings, yes. So it was challenging to select these, of course, because every one of these entries is really precious. So we start with, and so I've chosen one from a faculty colleague and one from a student colleague. Beginning with "I'm falling down on my ethnographic responsibilities and I need to be okay with that" by Sally Hahn, from April 10th, 2020. To be honest, I've felt both like I have an ethnographer's responsibility to document this time, and also so overwhelmed with just holding it together, with teaching, with my people at home, with all the feelings, that I get a little cranky and resentful about feeling this imperative to be meaningfully productive with this moment. I'm already a full-time professor, parent, and spouse. So, like, I'm not baking sourdough or sewing masks, much less collecting data on, say, experience of pregnant women during COVID isolation. I don't even wish I were someone who could do it all. Right now, I just wish The sun was shining in Oneonta, but it's Friday, April 10, and it's snowing. And so here's the bonus one, considering the season. This is Pandemic Halloween as a Ghost Town from November 1, 2020 by Melissa Layman. There were a few trick-or-treaters on the street tonight. Their tiny feet tapped on gravel as they walked with flashlights. They were friendly and small, but few lit driveways greeted them. They were hungry for candy and to be loved for their costumes. In a pandemic, Halloween is by ghosts in a ghost town. Okay, and then I'll read a bit from Pandemic Diary by Shasha Wallace from January 12, 2021, student author. I think most people my age would say they're angry or upset with the way COVID has taken away some events in our lives. But honestly, I'm a little thankful. My graduation still got to happen, and I didn't have to waste as much time sitting through the ceremony. Instead, I had a designated time to show up and walk the stage, which made it much easier and quicker to finish the ceremony and get my diploma. I'm a little upset I didn't get to play my senior season as captain of my rugby team, but I'm sure there will be other opportunities to make up for the lost time and season. I don't really mind wearing masks, and honestly, it's the least we can do to protect everyone else from ourselves. But a lot of people seem to have a problem with it. I think a lot of people forget that this isn't the end of the world, and there have been pandemics that society has survived before and continued afterwards. I believe people should take this time, if they haven't already, to reflect on what they want and how they treat others going forward. Isolation is the perfect place for reevaluation and realignment within oneself. So, thank you. Thanks to the authors for sharing that. So our entries were more than words, and the images shared on the Semester of Living Dangerously, the Pandemic Diaries blog website, were in black and white or in full color. As I mentioned, videos were shared, and these all captured the new strangeness of the everyday, for the most part, for the photo essays shared, the empty and surprising view of the world gone sideways. So what we'll see in the coming slides are just some examples of this, of going on walks around town, pets, wildlife, the daily routine, the weather, the loneliness of quarantine, the emptiness of campus. This is my angel right here. This is Cosima. My dog, Cosima here, she's sporting her Oneonta bandana / life-saving protective gear because when masking became the thing we were told to do, we used Cosima's bandanas. So thank you, Cozy. Yes. And here are images of, I've seen images of wildlife and sharing spaces with people in surprising new ways. So Matthew, this is the photo you took, right, of this.
From my back window.
Back window. Yeah. So yeah, it restructured all of our lives. Yes. So also, just we're going to take a look at a set that just show places that we were so familiar that now we're just uncanny due to the emptiness. Right. And I think so effective also just in the choices the photographer made, and the black and white is very affecting, and it really is striking. And when it's color, as in this example also. Also examples of loneliness and isolation. So many of our authors were experiencing it and then sharing it and reflecting on the places and spaces that we share with family or others, loved ones and friends, roommates. And also images of compassion and hope and a view towards an expectation that things will turn the corner, and that as we've been moving so quickly sideways into this strange new realm, we can find our way back to the path and world that we once enjoyed, or at least find a way to enjoy the world we have. So now I hand it back to Matthew. Thank you.
Thank you, Derek. We're moving towards our conclusion here, but we wanted to talk a little bit about the cross-disciplinarity of the work that appeared in the project, which I think makes it particularly interesting. And as Ed said, it was purposely designed to receive all types of contributions, whether they were in photographs, multimedia, all types of writing. Where we differed from the original mass observation is we gave no directives. We didn't instruct people on what we wanted. We just said, send what you want. So there's some really interesting stuff we received. I'd like to talk briefly about some of the creative works we received from classes that cooperated with us, some bilingual posts, some poetry, and Ed will mention about some photo essays and commentary we received. So one of the most exciting things in the book is that one professor, Maria Montoya, decided that she would share with the blog an assignment she gave to her class. And her class were all isolated, and they were taking Spanish conversation, and it's hard to have conversations when you're all isolated. So she came up with this idea of creating, with individual filmed contributions, a version of a Mexican telenovela, which, if you're not in the know, is a very sort of overly melodramatic Spanish language soap opera. And it was around the theme of, the pandemic. So I wanted to share a little bit of it with you just for a minute. We actually have in our book, which is easily available for sale there, we managed to get a QR code made. So if you have the book, you can just take your phone, scan the QR code, and play this to you. We were proud that we figured that out. So here is a clip from the Conversational Spanish telenovela, which is a contribution to our project. And I'll just play a minute of it or so.
Los voy a extrañar a todos. No quiero irme.
No me quiero ir, al menos estas vacaciones es solo por una semana.
Esta semana va a pasar muy rápido.
Este campus es mi hogar. No quiero volver a mi casa aunque sea por una semana.
Es una pandemia peligrosa, es una crisis que debemos tomarnos muy en serio. El país está en alerta y nosotros estamos con usted. Ya hay más de 100 muertos.
Un COVID, o sea, una enfermedad grave, COVID-19, que puede matarlos.
A someterse a cuarentenas de 14 días. El tiempo no es un tiempo caprichoso, es el tiempo en el que exactamente el virus se manifiesta.
¿Cuarentena? ¿Coronavirus? ¿Qué está pasando? Es algo de una película, ¿no? Ay.
All right. Okay. So you get the general idea, and it goes on for ways. But that was one particularly cool example of a class assignment we were able to share and preserve for posterity in our diary, in the pandemic diaries. We also had some bilingual posts, so we were not, exclusionary in whatever language people wish to contribute. So we had some Spanish language written posts, which we asked for a translation for, but we wanted to put them in the original language posted and a translation. And we also had poetry. And this is perhaps a rather bleak poetic vision. I'll recite it to you. A pandemic is a time when inventions fail. Hordes of automatons fighting molecules tinier than blood cells. The virus wins. The virus always wins. So clearly not an upbeat poem for the season, but it's important. This is where mass observation matters, because there's some things about emotion, about attitude, about fleeting feelings, and they're really hard to preserve, and they sometimes get obscured when we're giving traditional narratives. So these were some interesting examples, and Ed would like to talk about some further cross-disciplinary contributions to the book, including photo essays and other commentary.
We fight as an author group, I really wanted to share the poem the student wrote about wrestling about whether he was going to buy an Xbox for quarantine, and the final line was, "And here I am, one Xbox richer." But Matthew said, we have to do the one where the virus wins. One of my favorite posts that ended up happening was a photo essay by a photographer, an art student that was at our campus at the time, who created an entire photo essay, which she called "From the Outside Looking In." It was one of my favorite posts that got shared in all of the diary entries, and it takes up a big portion of the middle pages of it. And this student, Molly Filner, actually went around to all of her friends and family and took portraits of them from outside of their house. So whether through a window, whether through an open car door, wherever they were, and created this photo essay from the outside looking in, and then also had like a questionnaire that they asked for each one, where they submitted like, what are you doing? How are you with your friends? And so had these paired photos with the then interview. And it was just, it was creativity that I couldn't have imagined when we started on this project. And so I feel so welcome to highlight it because of the creativity that our students had and what they shared. And so please excuse, this is not her original photograph. I've edited it to include some of the language from the interview on the side of it, which was not her original artistic vision. But went around to all these colleagues and talked about them. And this is the feel of this photo essay from the outside looking in that I just loved and I just appreciated. So it was seeing couples, seeing families, portraits together, much in the style of those portrait photographs that people were taking at the time. And I really just loved it. And she wasn't the only person that submitted photographs. This one was from Gabrielle Bush, and she took a photograph of the same thing that I think a lot of us had at the time, that key rack that's right by the door, and there was the mask hanging right on the key rack. So like, okay, here's the final things I need to go out for the day. And I really appreciated that. Another person went around town and took a photograph of every single restaurant and all of the signs that they had hung in the early days, remembering when we were told that this would just be a 2-week lockdown, and that they were saying like, hey, we're gonna close down for the 2 weeks, we'll be back. And so those were all put in there and documented as part of our project. And I'm glad that they were. And this was a story, actually a friend of mine was at a hockey practice for her son. And at the hockey practice, the Zamboni caught on fire. And the guy who was driving the Zamboni, this brave Zamboni driver, finished driving all the way back to the bay and used the fire extinguisher, put the fire out. But that guy had to keep it together for 2 minutes while he slowly drove his Zambonis are not fast, right? Drove this Zamboni carefully back to the bay. And I thought that was great metaphor for what was going on at the time. I was like, we're all that Zamboni driver. And I posted this at 10 o'clock in the morning, my post sharing about the Zamboni driver. And I remember vividly that day because that exact day where my big takeaway with this was like, can we all just be a little kinder to each other? Can we be a little more patient with each other? That exact day that I did that post, the SUNY chancellor came to our campus and announced that our president was going to need to take another position elsewhere in SUNY and that an interim president was coming in. The day that I posted about being kinder to each other and our president was basically fired because of the way that the pandemic happened on our campus. And I vividly will always remember it because the way this diary project changed the way that I remember things.
Okay, and now the final portion. The final takeaway really was expressed so beautifully by Maria Montoya in an email to Matthew, and I think it's worth reading out. She said, all our relationships were screen mediated, and still something was lacking. The act of communal reflection on a global experience. The pandemic diaries reminded us that we were still a community waiting to be freed from captivity, that we were all missing each other. The pandemic diary allowed us to feel part of a community. And if you too would like to be part of a community, let's read along with the president of Lithuania, right? I had the opportunity to give him my book. Look at the thrill. He's very excited. So please, he's enjoying it. You can too. And if you haven't taken my fun map quiz of Europe, Lithuania is that part right up in there. If you are interested in reading more entries or reading any of our analytical chapters, you can check out our book. It was published in last November. You can find it for free on Amazon Kindle, and we have been #1 in contagious diseases, or you can go to the table in the back to get a copy of the book. I will put, when we're done, I'll put the link up here so that you can see it. But for now, thank you very much for attending.
Thank you so much, everybody. We do have time if anybody has any questions. And if anybody online has questions, you can feel free to type them in and Sophia will relay the question. Oh, sure.
Thank you. Thank you all. What a great presentation. What a great book. I was curious about the things that were sent in during the mass observation period. Was it all written, or were there any photographs or anything else that was physical besides the writing sent?
In the actual mass observation English project?
Yeah, in the English project, yeah.
Go ahead. Since you work.
Well, yeah, I mean, I used the archive. There weren't a lot of photographs, but it wasn't exclusively written entries. A lot of people were sort of pack rats. They would collect, like a poster for a talk or, the ticket they had on the subway, or, I mean, people would collect things and send them in, but they're mostly either pre-created images or pre-written images. There were some photographs, but not a lot. Now, by the 1930s, photography, wasn't exclusively for the wealthy, but I guess the idea of creating a photograph specifically for this purpose and mailing it to some foreign, some non-family group wasn't going to be in the culture. There's not a lot of, but there are some.
You had a question? Maybe you're just stretching.
Oh,
Sorry. Yeah, it's just that basically I'd screw it. Well, I wanted to ask, were you able to put every single submission in the thing?
We did. We take every submission from the blog and put it to the book. We invited everyone to submit a release. When we were doing it as a blog, it was much more free form. The active submission we were assuming was giving us permission to post it publicly on the blog. They kind of knew what they were doing when they said, publish this online, and it was immediately available. As we collected them and brought them into the book, when we work with a traditional press like SUNY Press, they held us to a higher standard. We had to go back to our contributors, many of them alumni now, and get them to sign physical releases and be able to share that. And then we also took the opportunity to edit the collection down to what we consider to be a representative sample in order to make it stronger by what we were sharing.
And the blog itself was sort of lightly moderated, because when we set this up, we had no idea what we would get. And, as I'm sure you're aware, in the the blogosphere, the social media world, I mean, you can get some pretty harsh sort of stuff. And we were a little worried at first that what we would receive. So we did reserve the right to lightly moderate, but we were super impressed because we got, it was mostly very personal details and sometimes emotive things. But there was no hate speech, no blaming, no finger pointing, no
misinformation.
Something
we're very worried about.
Partisanship. I mean, there was a very human moment. It gave me sort of faith in human nature.
Yeah.
No diatribe, no expletives. I mean, people could have run wild because all they had to do is press the submit button.
We did have chronicles of how many push-ups one of our presenters was doing each day.
Right.
That was the frequent entry was there.
Yeah.
But we were pleased that, there's almost nothing that we had to, bar from going on the blog.
Yes, in the very back.
Yeah, if you were to repeat this project, given the same circumstances, same context, what is something that you wish you could have included or you would include that you weren't otherwise able to?
One of our frequent faculty contributors was Maria Montoya. And I remember she sent us in a photograph of her desk and the desk that she was working at. And if we did it again, I would have done more directives and more emails to people who had contributed in the past and said, hey, you've contributed before. Can you take a picture of your desk today? I think that would have been interesting. So many of us were kind of working in closets or finding space or carefully angling our cameras to not show the bed because we were in a spare bedroom or a guest bedroom and things like that. I wish we could have done more of that stuff. At that point, being in online learning, I remember working 14, 16-hour days. If you saw a picture of my desk, you would see my coffee pot. I literally moved from my kitchen to put on my desk because we were just handling questions and problems constantly. And it was too long to walk down to the kitchen. I wish we had documented that. So more directives is what I would have done differently. Anyone else want to share?
No, I mean, I agree. I would have done something like that. And I think I would have liked to have seen more art. I had a lot of really creative students that year that were interested in cartooning, interested in that kind of thing. And I wish that we had more of that. They didn't submit any. Actually, I thought there would have been some and we didn't get any, but I would request perhaps as a directive, those of you artistically inclined, show us how you're feeling.
So I have a question related to what you both just said, because the methodology is fascinating. But wouldn't that be changing the methodology if you were to?
No, some of the mass observation, they did have directives where they said, oh, what are your thoughts on this current thing or there? And some of them are more open-ended where it was just send in your diaries. So there would have been room for us to make those choices. But Matthew's the expert here. He'll tell you.
Our methodology differed from the mass observation that we were so open-ended. So in that sense, you're right. It would have differed a bit, but giving some direction, I think would have shaped it a little more. But this was, the whole lesson behind this project is a lot of things look inevitable in hindsight, and well-formed and pre-planned. This was a little creative chaos. We were just responding to an emergency, trying to put a bunch of ideas together, sort of scrambling, and now it looks like, it had a seamless maturity, but a lot of it was just keeping our head above water, and we felt the responsibility to preserve this moment for the future.
I think we have time for one more question.
Yes, so you discussed in the beginning of your presentation about how your students were looking at the World War II mass observations. And there was a discussion between them. Oh, they're not taking it seriously. Yes, they are. They're trying to live their life. Do you think the same discussion would be had with your mass observations you discovered in the COVID pandemic?
There's a entry that I think of to try to answer your question. I think we were harder on ourselves in the pandemic than people would be looking back. And the thing that I would say to that is I remember reading the journal entry of someone who bought a car. And he wrote right in the journal entry, I know some people are gonna be mad at me that I went out and bought a car, but I needed a car to be able to go around town and do my stuff. So I went and I bought a car. And I know people are gonna be mad at me about that, but it needed to be done. We were very hard on ourselves during that time. And I think that that's one of the things that we forget. So I don't know that people would be hard on us reading it afterwards because we were so hard on ourselves at the time. But that's my personal opinion.
Oh, I'd just be interested to see what happens because it's going to be completely different, whatever it is.
Yeah. And I guess, you know, the difference too between the Muriel Green entry, I mean, the Muriel Green young woman, she at least had opportunities for frivolity and enjoyment. And a big theme for this, you know, enjoyment is going around the block, you know, walking around the block or going to an empty park. I mean, it is a bit more of a somber thing. So, you know, people's debate over whether people are acting improperly. I mean, a lot of them, their, you know, activities are sort of constrained. And there's some sort of tragic tales in our book of people whose grandparents had come, you know, live as a unit with them and then got seriously ill and died. I mean, you know, there's really.
And younger people trying to keep it together and working and helping and trying to be everything for their family and keeping up with their schoolwork and just becoming very overwhelmed.
There was one correspondent, I mean, her father was working in a trucking firm and, you know, his livelihood instantly evaporated as soon as the pandemic came. You know, put a huge strain on the family and you know, their ability to survive. So, I mean, so there was, you know, some really important stuff to record like that.
True.
Thank you again so much. This has been. Before we break for the refreshments and continue the conversation, please make sure to check out the exhibit that does accompany this lecture. It's just outside the Alden room to the right.
You can see the actual book that started the whole thing, just when you started from Heather.
Yes, absolutely. And if you're interested in joining the Alden Scholar Series Committee, please talk to one of us. We're always looking for new members. It's a fun group and a lot of fun putting these together. Also, if you're a faculty member who has published a book in the last 5 years and you're interested in presenting, come as one, because we're always looking for new presenters.
We made it back to.
We're back to number 1 contagious diseases. Speaking.
It helps to be free.
That's in the world.
The most popular free book about contagious diseases from academic press.
And if you would like your own physical copy of the book, Dr. Henley has a sample there that you can look through, and there's a sheet for you to sign up to order. Just fill it out, and Darren Lyons will be in contact when your copy is in, and they're less than $26, so it's.
That's the perfect gift for all occasions. Don't be shy.
Let's remember that, get some of that, you know, gift giving out of the way right now.
The bookstore has a shipment coming, but, you know, it's been a little delayed. So if you sign your list there, then they'll arrange to hand it over to you. And payment can be done later.
Okay. Couple more things before we go. Please take a moment if you can to fill out the feedback forms. They're really helpful for us making future events better and better. There are extra pencils on the round table in the back if you need them. We are also very excited for the next Alden Scholar Series lecture next semester. It will be presented by Dr. Brian Haley on his book, Homes and Counterculture, traditionalism, appropriation, and the birth of the social fields. So stay tuned for details. Lead credit. If you're here for lead credit, please find Dr. Norlander or Megan. They're sitting right now by the main doors, but they may also be wandering for refreshments soon, so look for them. And without further ado, you're all welcome to stay and chat or get some refreshments through the back door to the right to 318. And enjoy. And thank you again so much.
You may stick put.